Gaming the scheduler at SHARCNet. My name is James Desjardins. This presentation is about using the SHARCNet scheduler in a way that is not just a passive tool for getting your jobs into the running state, but actually considering the shape of jobs that are on the cluster and how you can submit them in a way that will both increase the efficiency of the system overall, as well as give you a better chance at an earlier entrance into the running state, as well as an earlier completion time of your jobs. So let's take an example here. Let's say we have a computing node, and this computing node has CPUs. We'll say in this case 16 cores. It has access, these cores have access to shared memory. In this case we'll say 36 gigs, and we'll plot that along the z-axis going back. And then these cores run over time, time going up the y-axis. So a scheduling cycle is working, that is, over time, the scheduler is saying, there are these resources available, and if a job fits, it will start that job executing at this time. The scheduler receives jobs based on the queue submission function, in this case the sq sub command. Let's say we have this example of sq sub, a user saying that they want to run an MPI job, requesting 8 cores, and the memory per process is 2 gigs for a duration of an estimated 3 hours. So we'll visualize this as these multi-dimensional rectangles. In this case, we're looking at the 3 dimensions, the number of cores, the amount of memory, and then the amount of time. In this case, we have cores 1 through 8. We can see here that there are 36 gigs of memory. Each one of these notches is 2 gigs. And we can see that each of the ranks has a different piece of memory. And then here we see that there are 3 hours worth of this process. So at this scheduling cycle, it sees there's plenty of resources available, and it just puts the job in here. Now it's running. So we get another job, a threaded job requesting 6 cores and 12 gigs of memory for 2 hours. That would look something like this. The number of cores, the amount of memory that's shared among these threads, and then 2 hours. At this scheduling cycle, there's still plenty of resources available, and this job starts running. There we go. Let's say we get a serial job. It's requesting 8 gigs of memory for 1 hour. That would look something like this. A single core for 1 hour, and then these 8 gigs of memory. And it fits right there during this cycle. Now, during this cycle, we'll also notice that the memory that's available across shared through these cores is now saturated. So all the memory is used, and although there is a core that isn't writing, there is no memory available for this core. So this core will remain idle for this scheduling cycle. There's no other choice. There is no job small enough to run here. The scheduling cycle moves forward, and then we see here that there are some resources available. Although a lot of the memory is being consumed and a lot of the cores are being consumed, there are still 2 cores with about 8 gigs of memory left. So let's say there is a job in the queue here that's threaded requesting 2 cores, and the memory per process is 4 gigs. In 12 hours, there's the only thing in here. It'll look something like this, and this job can start running immediately. Now, moving forward, we're going to take a look at how a big shared system with many users in the scheduler jobs will pile up, and we'll take a look at how you can best submit jobs with your estimates that will get your jobs in, running as quickly as possible, and completing as quickly as possible, but also not wasting resources on the cluster itself. So let's just simplify things. Here's the actual space that job is taking up, 2 cores, and then the memory, and then plenty of time, and we'll just push all these back against the back wall, just looking at the dimension of cores over time. So here we have the schedule cycle is moved up, and then let's say more jobs start coming in. So a user submits a job for MPI, and 16 cores. So this job will require the entire node. It'll look something like this, and if this is a high priority job from a user, that's the earliest that it can happen, and it will be sitting up there waiting for the queue. Now, given this high priority 16-core job sitting there, let's just take a look at some properties of what these jobs are. The scheduler sees the user's requests for resources. In this case, let's say for this threaded job, the request was for 12 hours. At this point, the scheduler thinks that this 16-core job won't start for those 12 hours, but really, the job might only take, let's say, 8 hours. If the scheduling cycle gets up to that point and the job had been completed, then those resources will become available. That is, the scheduler will not hold all those resources even though the job has completed, this threaded job, and then this job can start right away. So in terms of time requests, you can put larger time requests, and if your job finishes earlier, those resources will become available to other jobs. Now, that's not the same as some of the other properties that you're giving requests for. For example, memory. If you overestimate the amount of memory that your job needs, regardless of how small the memory of your job is requiring, those memory resources will not be available to other jobs. Now, let's go back to just looking at this, and what will happen as jobs build up in here. So let's say I want to submit a job now, this serial job with requesting 34 gigs of memory for 18 hours. This is a big, tall job. It can only possibly start after that 16-core job. Now let's say I know actually it doesn't take 18 hours to run, but it can always run within 10 hours on these systems. Then if I change my estimate to 10 hours, what can happen is, given these memory requirements, there will be enough memory and enough time to fit my job in before the 16-core job. So this is backfilling, even though this job might have higher priority, and the resources are tight. This job will now be able to fit in both start and complete before that 16-core job. Now, given that it requests 34 gigs of memory and there's already a 2 gig job running, the rest of the cores on that system during this time will be idle, as all the memory that's available is being used up. So during the period of this 10-hour job, the rest of this node will be idle. Now let's look back at what happens when we have memory. Let's say we actually know. We took a look at the profiling. We found out that really this job did have a requirement of 34 gigs at some point, but it was really just a spike at the end of the process. Now, what we would like to do, and this is largely for the efficiency of the compute system, is separate this job so that we could actually run for 9 hours, only requesting the 2 gigs that are available here, and then submit a single 1-hour serial job requiring all of the big memory. Now, we want to be able to submit both of these jobs right now and have them have the same priority as running them all as one. That is, we don't want to be punished for separating this big memory spike from the other job. So what this will look like is, we'll scratch this out for now, and then we'll submit a serial job requesting 2 gigs for 9 hours. That's this first one. Now, because it's only requesting 2 gigs of memory, it can start right away and it'll get started. And then we submit. We find that the job ID of this, once it's scheduled and running, is 123. And then we can submit another serial job requesting 34 gigs, but only needing it for 1 hour. And then we just say that this job is dependent on the completion of job 123. And what that looks like is this. So at the completion of the longer 9-hour job, this one will be allowed to start and will be set in a priority as though it was submitted at the same time. Now we see that the only time when this node is saturated for memory is this 1 hour that we've isolated. Now, this way of using the scheduler and separating, sequential jobs into, multiple jobs depending on another parameter in the job is really a huge benefit to the efficiency of the system. Where, as this whole area was idle before, now all of this space is available for other processes to occur. So we'll leave it like that, and then we'll take a look at what happens as more jobs come into the queue. So a user submits an MPI job with 4 nodes and 3 gigs per rank for 9 hours, looks something like this. The scheduler moves forward. There's a threaded job, 6 cores, sharing 4 gigs for 3 hours, looks something like that. Another threaded job with 12 gigs for 3 hours, and then it stacks on top of there. So these jobs will keep accumulating, and this will end up being some complex pattern of resources. Resources being accounted for by jobs. So let's say now I want to submit an MPI job. It requires 6 cores and 4 gigs per rank for 5 hours. Even if we just look at the number of cores by time, we'll see that that doesn't fit anywhere except for after that high priority 16-core job. Now let's take a look at what that looks like in the third dimension. We have the 6 cores requiring this 4 gigs per memory, but really it only requires the 4 gigs for a portion of the time. In these middle hours, it requires half the memory. Now, in the case where I want to submit this parallel job across, 6 processes, if the job doesn't really benefit that much from this being a single parallel job, that is, if these processes were actually independent enough to run on their own, that is, they don't really benefit that much from sharing information while they're running, if they could each be submitted as a perfectly parallel job, that is, each one being its own serial job, then there are many benefits to actually submitting it that way. That is, submitting it as rather than one MPI job as 6 serial jobs. So if we just, instead of running this MPI and 6, run it as 6 sequential serial jobs, all requiring 4 gigs in the runtime, we can see that they would actually fit into this period of time before this 16-core job. Now, that's ignoring the amount of memory that's required by these processes. And if we take a look at the memory, we see that during this time, the memory is actually saturated. We can't fit all those jobs in there, as well as the memory being saturated during this time, and those jobs can't fit in there. So we can actually only fit these 2 here. The rest of the 6 would end up running at the same time as the full MPI job up there. And the actual completion time of all of this job or set of jobs would be the same as submitting as MPI. But let's say we also consider, like we did before in the serial job, that the memory demands can actually be isolated. That where there are memory spikes, those can be their own jobs, and then separate the actual memory demands into dependently sequential job submissions. So let's take a look at what would happen here. So what we'd actually like to do is separate it like this, where we submit 6 serial jobs, each for 1 hour, requiring double the amount of memory that these 3-hour jobs would require, and then those complete, and then another double memory set of 1-hour jobs. So we would submit 6 of these SQ serial commands requiring 4 gigs for 1 hour. And then we would submit another 6 right after that, serial jobs, where we put the wait job ID in. That is, this serial job cannot start until the completion of this serial job. This serial job cannot start until the completion of this serial job, which would look like this. So these jobs are now dependent on their initial serial jobs that have double the memory requirements. And then the same thing up above, where the final 1-hour jobs are dependent on the completion of the 3-hour jobs. Now, what this would look like in terms of the scheduler is really, right away. At this point, 3 of these 4 gig jobs could start. And then when these are done, 3 more of these 4 gig jobs could start. So all of these 6 jobs have started in here. At the completion of these, then the 3-hour 2 gig jobs could start. That is, these first 3. On the completion of those, there's still only 36 gigs running. The next 3 2 gig jobs could start. And then as soon as the scheduler cycle gets up here, we could actually see that the final set of 4 gigs could start there, and then the final set of 4 gigs could start there. Now, in this way, the exact same amount of work has been done, but now here, even within a very complex set of jobs and memory usage and time, this 6-core, 5-hour job was able to complete before the previous MPI job would have even started. Now, importantly, this is only the case whenever the job that was running in parallel could actually be separated without too much computational consequence into a set of serial jobs. Now, importantly, what we really want to get across here is that thinking of the scheduler in different ways of submitting jobs and actually using the scheduler as an advanced computing resource and getting your work running more efficiently not only benefits the user in terms of greatly reducing the time to completion of a lot of jobs, but also by submitting jobs in a way that allows it to fit within a complex schedule can greatly increase the efficiency of the system overall. And that's really the way to think about scheduling and gaming the scheduler at SHARCNet.